The autumn rain fell steadily on the tarmac of London's private aviation terminal as security personnel went about their routine checks. It was supposed to be an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, the kind where nothing particularly newsworthy happened. The Royal Protection Unit officers stationed at the exclusive terminal had seen countless departures of dignitaries, celebrities, and members of the royal family over the years. They knew the protocols by heart, understood the delicate balance between security and discretion that their positions demanded. Officer James Mitchell had been with the unit for 12 years. His partner, Sarah Chen, brought 8 years of experience to their team. Together they had developed an instinct for spotting irregularities, even in the most routine situations. On this particular day, they were monitoring the departure of a private flight scheduled to leave for southern France. The passenger manifest listed only one name that mattered: Her Majesty Queen Camilla. The black Range Rover arrived precisely on schedule, pulling up to the private entrance where photographers were strictly forbidden. 2 additional security vehicles flanked it, their occupants maintaining their professional vigilance. Everything appeared normal at first glance. The Queen Consort emerged from the vehicle, dressed elegantly in a tailored coat and heels, her hair perfectly styled despite the dreary weather. She moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to public scrutiny. Though this departure was meant to be private, Mitchell and Chen performed their standard security sweep of the aircraft while the luggage was being loaded. This was protocol, nothing personal, though the tension in the air felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the unusual timing of the trip, coming just weeks after the late Queen Elizabeth's estate matters were still being settled. Perhaps it was the way Camilla's private secretary seemed more nervous than usual, clutching her tablet with white-knuckled intensity. The routine baggage scan raised the first red flag. Jen noticed something unusual on the monitor, a density and shape that didn't match typical travel items. She glanced at Mitchell, who had seen it too. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Years of training kicked in as they maintained their composure while calling for a supervisor. Detective Inspector Robert Harrison arrived within minutes. A veteran of royal security with connections throughout the palace infrastructure, Harrison had a reputation for handling sensitive situations with absolute discretion. He examined the scan results, his expression remaining neutral even as his mind raced through the implications. 3 pieces of luggage showed anomalies. The protocol was clear, but the situation was unprecedented. Harrison approached Camilla's private secretary with quiet professionalism. "Ma'am, we need to conduct a secondary inspection of some luggage items. Standard procedure." His tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. The secretary's face paled. She fumbled with her phone, likely trying to reach someone at the palace for guidance. Inside the private terminal's secure inspection room, away from any cameras or prying eyes, the luggage was carefully opened. What they found left even the experienced officers momentarily speechless. Wrapped in velvet cloth and carefully packed between layers of clothing were items that clearly didn't belong in personal travel luggage. A diamond tiara that Harrison immediately recognized from official portraits. A collection of antique jewelry boxes bearing the royal cipher, pearl necklaces with clasps marked with the late Queen's initials. An ornate brooch that had been photographed countless times on the late monarch during state occasions. Mitchell carefully documented each item with gloved hands, while Chen maintained the chain of custody paperwork. The room fell silent except for the click of the camera and the scratch of pen on paper. Each piece was catalogued, photographed from multiple angles, and secured. The weight of what they were dealing with settled over everyone present. Harrison made the call that would change everything. He contacted his superior at Scotland Yard, using coded language that indicated a situation of extreme sensitivity. Within the hour, senior officials from both the Metropolitan Police and the royal household were converging on the terminal. The flight to France was officially delayed due to technical difficulties, a convenient cover story that would hold for now. Camilla waited in a private lounge, her composure showing slight cracks as the minutes stretched into hours. Her legal representative arrived, a distinguished barrister who specialized in matters concerning the royal family. Quiet conversations happened behind closed doors, voices never rising but the tension evident in every gesture and glance. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small circle of people who initially knew about it. These weren't minor trinkets or sentimental pieces that might be disputed in estate matters. These were significant historical artifacts, pieces that belonged to the crown, items that had been worn by monarchs and documented in official records. Their value wasn't just monetary, though that alone ran into millions of pounds. Their historical and cultural significance was immeasurable. Questions multiplied faster than answers. How had these items left the palace? Who had authorized their packing? What was the intended destination? Was this a misunderstanding? A clerical error in the chaos following the late Queen's passing? Or was something more deliberate at play? The Royal Protection Unit secured the terminal, ensuring no information leaked to the press. Every person present signed additional non-disclosure agreements. The items were transferred to a secure facility, each piece requiring special handling and storage. Gemologists and royal historians were quietly summoned to verify the authenticity and provide detailed assessments. As evening fell, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the terminal windows. The private jet sat empty on the tarmac, its departure indefinitely postponed. Inside the terminal, history was being written in hushed tones and careful documentation. The routine Wednesday afternoon had transformed into a crisis that would test the very foundations of royal protocol and trust. Mitchell and Chen completed their reports with meticulous detail, knowing these documents would be scrutinized by the highest levels of authority. Every observation, every timestamp, every photograph would matter. They had stumbled upon something that transcended normal security procedures, something that would ripple through the corridors of power and change the narrative around the royal family's most private affairs. The story was contained, for now, but secrets of this magnitude rarely stayed buried forever, somewhere in that terminal. As officials deliberated and lawyers conferred, everyone present understood that this was only the beginning. The discovery at the airport had opened a door that couldn't easily be closed, revealing questions about inheritance, entitlement, and the blurred lines between personal property and national treasure. The night ahead would be long, filled with difficult conversations and harder decisions. But for now, the Royal Protection Unit had done its job, following protocol even when it meant stopping one of the most prominent figures in the nation. The crown jewels and royal heirlooms were secure. What happened next would depend on investigations yet to unfold and truths yet to be revealed. The interrogation room at Scotland Yard was nothing like the opulent surroundings Camilla was accustomed to. The walls were plain beige, the furniture functional rather than decorative, and the fluorescent lighting cast an unflattering glow that stripped away any pretense of glamour. Detective Chief Inspector Margaret Foster sat across from the Queen Consort, a stack of inventory documents before her. This was unprecedented territory for everyone involved. Foster had been chosen for her reputation of absolute fairness and her ability to navigate politically sensitive investigations. She understood the gravity of the situation, but she also understood that her duty was to the truth, regardless of titles or positions. Her colleague, Detective Inspector Thomas Webb, operated the recording equipment while a royal legal advisor sat beside Camilla, taking careful notes. The inventory laid out before them told a remarkable story. 23 items in total had been discovered in the luggage. Each piece had been catalogued, photographed, and cross-referenced with palace records. The most significant was the diadem, a piece commissioned in 1820 that had been worn by Queen Elizabeth during her coronation procession. Its disappearance from the royal collection would have eventually triggered alarms throughout the palace security systems. Foster began with the most straightforward questions, her tone professional, but not accusatory. Your Majesty, can you explain how these items came to be in your personal luggage? Camilla's hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Her barrister leaned in to whisper something, but she waved him away gently. The Queen Consort's explanation was measured, each word chosen carefully. She claimed the items were gifts, personal bequests from the late Queen Elizabeth that had been verbally promised during private conversations. No documentation existed for these alleged gifts, no witnesses to these conversations, no records in any official capacity. In the world of royal protocol, where everything was typically documented in triplicate, this absence of paperwork was glaring. Webb presented photographs of each item, asking Camilla to identify them and explain the circumstances under which they allegedly became her property. The pearl necklaces, she insisted, had been given to her during a private tea 3 months before the Queen's death. The brooch was supposedly a gift following a successful charity event. The tiara, she claimed, was promised to her as recognition of her service to the crown. Foster listened carefully, making notes, but keeping her expression neutral. The story had elements that could be believable. Personal relationships within the royal family were complex, and verbal agreements weren't uncommon in private settings. However, the sheer value and historical significance of these items made informal transfers highly improbable. These weren't personal trinkets. They were pieces that appeared in official portraits, items that were photographed and documented at state events, artifacts that technically belonged to the nation rather than any individual. The investigation had already begun pulling palace records. Security footage from the royal residences was being reviewed. Staff members who had access to the jewelry vaults were being interviewed. Phone records were being examined. Bank statements were being scrutinized for any unusual transactions. The machinery of a major investigation was in motion, even as everyone involved tried to maintain absolute secrecy. Dr. Helena Price, the Royal Collection's chief curator, was brought in to provide expert testimony. She had served the monarchy for 30 years and knew the provenance of every significant piece in the royal jewelry collection. Her testimony was damning in its precision. Each item found in Camilla's luggage was listed in the official inventory of crown property. None had been authorized for removal. None had been gifted according to any protocols. The proper channels for such transfers involved multiple approvals, documentation, and official records. Nothing of that nature existed. Price explained the difference between personal property and crown property, a distinction that many people outside the palace walls didn't fully understand. Much of what the public saw royal family members wearing actually belonged to the state. These items were on loan, essentially, to be worn at official functions and then returned to the collection. Personal gifts did occur, but they followed strict procedures and were always documented. The interrogation continued for hours. Foster moved through her questions methodically, building a timeline of events. When had Camilla allegedly received each item? Where were these conversations? Who else might have been present? How were the items transported from the palace to her private residence? Who packed them for this trip? Camilla's private secretary, Elizabeth Morton, was interviewed separately. The middle-aged woman who had served the Queen Consort for 5 years appeared genuinely distressed. She admitted to packing the luggage under specific instructions but claimed she didn't examine the contents closely. She had assumed everything was legitimate personal property. When shown photographs of the items, she seemed shocked at their significance. Morton's testimony revealed something interesting. The packing had been done hastily, with Camilla personally overseeing which items were included. Normally, such tasks would be handled entirely by staff following established routines. The personal involvement suggested deliberate choices were being made about what to take. Meanwhile, forensic accountants were examining financial records. They discovered that Camilla had recently consulted with several auction houses, inquiring about the discreet sale of historical jewelry. The inquiries had been made through intermediaries, but the trail eventually led back to her office. Phone records showed calls to private collectors in Paris and Geneva, individuals known for acquiring significant pieces without asking too many questions about provenance. The investigation uncovered something else troubling. This wasn't the first time items had gone missing from the royal collection. Over the past 18 months, several pieces had been noted as temporarily relocated for cleaning or repair. Some had never been returned to their proper places in the vault. The pattern suggested a systematic removal of valuable items, done slowly enough to avoid immediate detection. Foster presented this evidence carefully, watching Camilla's reactions. The Queen Consort maintained her composure, but the confidence she had displayed initially was eroding. Her legal team requested breaks, huddled consultations where urgent whispers filled the small conference rooms. The most damaging evidence came from digital forensics. Text messages recovered from Camilla's personal phone showed conversations with her financial advisor about liquidity issues. There were discussions about maintaining her lifestyle, concerns about personal expenses, and veiled references to utilizing available assets. While not explicitly incriminating, the context was highly suggestive. Palace staff members provided additional pieces to the puzzle. Several testified about unusual requests from Camilla's office, jewelry pieces being borrowed for photography sessions that never appeared in any official photos, items being taken for appraisal that weren't returned promptly, security protocols being bypassed with explanations that seemed reasonable at the time, but looked suspicious in retrospect. The late Queen's former private secretary was interviewed extensively. She revealed that Elizabeth had expressed concerns in her final months about some pieces going missing. The elderly monarch had been meticulous about her collection, noticing when items weren't where they should be. She had requested an inventory, check. But that process had been delayed, and then her death had overshadowed everything else. As dawn broke over London, Foster compiled her preliminary findings. The evidence painted a troubling picture of systematic theft, carefully planned and executed over months. The airport discovery had been fortunate timing, likely catching an attempt to move the most valuable items out of the country before a comprehensive inventory could reveal their absence. Camilla was not arrested, not yet. Her status complicated matters significantly. The legal implications of charging a sitting queen consort with theft were unprecedented. Constitutional experts were being consulted. The Prime Minister had been briefed. The King himself would need to be informed, a conversation that everyone involved dreaded. The interrogation concluded with Camilla being released to palace custody. She would remain in the country, her passport surrendered to authorities. Electronic monitoring would track her movements. The investigation would continue, gathering evidence, building a case that would need to be airtight given who it involved. Foster closed her files, exhausted but determined. This case would define her career one way or another. The evidence was strong, but the politics were treacherous. Justice would need to navigate through constitutional complexities, public opinion, and the very foundations of how the monarchy operated. The crown jewels were safe, recovered before they could disappear into private collections abroad. But the damage to the royal family's reputation was only beginning to unfold. The investigation expanded rapidly in the days following the airport incident, reaching into corners of royal life that had never been examined so thoroughly. Detective Chief Inspector Foster assembled a specialized team, each member chosen for their expertise and discretion. They worked from a secure location in central London, away from prying eyes and curious journalists who were beginning to sense that something significant was happening behind palace walls. Financial analyst David Chen was the first to uncover the deeper patterns. Examining 5 years of financial records, he found a troubling trajectory. Camilla's personal expenses had increased dramatically since becoming queen consort, far outpacing her official allowance. Designer wardrobes, jewelry purchases, gifts to friends, charitable donations made in her name, renovations to private residences, all totaled millions of pounds annually. While the royal family was wealthy, individual members still operated within budgets, and she had exceeded hers significantly. The money had to come from somewhere. Chen traced various income streams and discovered several concerning transactions. Payments from offshore accounts appeared in her private bank records, amounts that coincided suspiciously with the disappearance dates of various royal collection items. These accounts were registered in tax havens, owned by shell companies that required extensive investigation to penetrate. Foster brought in international cooperation, reaching out to authorities in Switzerland, Monaco, and the British Virgin Islands. The shell companies led back to a network of private dealers and collectors who specialized in acquiring items with questionable provenance. These weren't common criminals, but sophisticated operators who catered to wealthy clients wanting to own pieces of history without the inconvenience of legal ownership. One dealer in Geneva, André Beaumont, became a person of interest. His gallery specialized in royal memorabilia and historical jewelry. When investigators showed him photographs of items from the royal collection, he became visibly uncomfortable. Under pressure and facing potential prosecution for handling stolen goods, he cooperated. His records revealed that over the past 2 years, He had facilitated the sale of 7 pieces matching descriptions of items missing from the royal collection. The amounts were staggering. A single brooch had sold for £1.2 million. A set of pearl earrings fetched £800,000. The total value of items Beaumont had handled exceeded £6 million. The money had been carefully laundered through the shell companies before finding its way, in smaller increments, to accounts Camilla could access. Beaumont provided another crucial piece of information. He had met with Camilla personally on 2 occasions, meetings that had taken place during official royal visits to Switzerland. These weren't random encounters but carefully arranged appointments, where terms were discussed and agreements reached. The dealer had documentation, photographs of some pieces, and detailed correspondence that, while coded, clearly showed Camilla's involvement. The investigation team interviewed current and former palace staff, and gradually a picture emerged of how the scheme had operated. Camilla had exploited her position and the trust placed in her. As queen consort, she had legitimate access to the jewelry collection for official events. She would borrow pieces, wear them publicly, establishing that they were in her possession. Then, instead of returning them promptly, she would claim they needed cleaning or minor repairs. The palace had systems to track such things, but they relied heavily on trust and self-reporting. A queen consort saying a piece was with her jeweler was rarely questioned. The items would then be replaced with high-quality replicas, good enough to pass casual inspection but worthless compared to the originals. The real pieces would be smuggled out through her personal belongings during travel, hidden among legitimate items and eventually delivered to buyers abroad. Susan Palmer, a former lady-in-waiting who had left service 6 months earlier, provided a breakthrough testimony. She had witnessed Camilla photographing jewelry pieces in private, taking detailed shots from multiple angles. When Palmer questioned this unusual behavior, she was told it was for insurance documentation. But Palmer had been troubled enough to make private notes about the dates and items involved. Those notes matched perfectly with pieces that had subsequently gone missing. Palmer revealed more uncomfortable truths. She had observed Camilla meeting with individuals who clearly weren't part of official business. Encounters during foreign trips, where the queen consort would slip away from scheduled events. Security had noted these absences but hadn't questioned them, assuming they were personal matters that were none of their concern. In retrospect, these were likely meetings with dealers and intermediaries. The investigation also uncovered strained relationships within the royal household. Several staff members, speaking under condition of anonymity, described Camilla as increasingly difficult in recent months. She had become paranoid about people watching her, suspicious of routine security procedures, and agitated when anyone questioned her activities. This behavior had intensified after the late queen's death, when it became clear that a comprehensive inventory of royal property would eventually be conducted. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic psychologist brought in to profile the behavior patterns, offered insights into the motivation. This wasn't simple greed, she explained, but a complex mixture of entitlement, insecurity, and financial pressure. Camilla had spent years as a controversial figure, always compared unfavorably to Diana, criticized by the public, barely tolerated by some family members. The jewelry represented both financial security and a tangible claim to royal legitimacy. The pressure to maintain appearances was intense. As queen consort, she was expected to look impeccable at all functions, to represent the monarchy with appropriate grandeur. The costs of doing so were enormous. Designer gowns, jewelry to complement each outfit, gifts for hosts during foreign visits, maintaining multiple residences to royal standards, all required constant infusions of money. Her official allowance covered much, but her taste exceeded its limits. Foster's team discovered something particularly troubling in their examination of palace security footage. In the weeks immediately following Queen Elizabeth's death, when the royal family was in mourning and the palace was in chaos, Camilla had accessed the jewelry vault multiple times. Each visit was technically authorized, but the frequency was unusual. Security logs showed she had been alone in the vault for extended periods, something that violated protocols requiring at least 2 people present during access. Technical analysis of the security system revealed something even more concerning. Someone with administrative access had deleted portions of footage from that period. The deletions were sophisticated, done in a way that avoided triggering obvious alerts. Only a detailed forensic examination revealed the gaps. Whoever had done this had knowledge of the system's architecture and security protocols. The investigation identified Marcus Webb, head of Palace Electronic Security, as having the necessary access and expertise. When interviewed, Webb initially denied everything but eventually admitted that Camilla had pressured him to delete specific segments of footage. She had claimed it was to protect personal family moments during the mourning period, an explanation he had accepted without question. His cooperation now provided investigators with information about what the deleted footage had shown. Webb described seeing footage before its deletion, showing Camilla removing items from the vault, pieces she placed in her handbag rather than logging them out properly. She had taken advantage of the confusion during the mourning period, when regular protocols were relaxed and everyone was focused on funeral arrangements rather than inventory management. The international investigation expanded further. Authorities in France raided a private villa in Provence that Camilla had visited multiple times. There, hidden in a safe, they found 3 more pieces from the royal collection, items not included in the airport seizure. The villa belonged to a close friend of Camilla's, a French aristocrat named Charlotte Dubois, who claimed complete ignorance about the jewelry's origins. Her phone records told a different story, showing extensive communication with Camilla about the items and the situation. As the evidence mounted, the investigation revealed a scheme more extensive and longer-running than initially suspected. This hadn't been an impulsive decision or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a carefully orchestrated operation spanning at least 2 years, possibly longer. The sophistication suggested planning, consultation with experts in smuggling and money laundering, and a network of accomplices both inside and outside the palace. Foster compiled interim reports for senior officials, each one adding layers to an increasingly disturbing picture. The Queen Consort had systematically looted the royal collection, exploiting her position, manipulating security systems, and building an international network to dispose of priceless artifacts. The items recovered so far represented only a portion of what had been taken. Investigators estimated at least 15 more pieces were missing, valued collectively at over £20 million. The pressure on Foster was immense. Politicians wanted answers, palace officials demanded discretion, and the public remained blissfully unaware that a constitutional curio. The secret couldn't hold forever. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the airport incident, a junior reporter at The Guardian received an anonymous tip. The message was brief but explosive. Investigate why Queen Camilla's scheduled trip to France was abruptly cancelled, and why certain royal jewelry pieces were suddenly unavailable for photography at official palace archives. The journalist Rebecca Walsh had covered the royal beat for 5 years and knew that even small irregularities often indicated larger stories. Walsh began making careful inquiries. She contacted sources within the palace staff, called security personnel she had cultivated relationships with over the years, and reached out to jewelry experts who occasionally worked with the royal collection. Nobody would speak on record, but the pattern of nervous deflections and hurried no comments told her she was onto something significant. When she requested official confirmation about the status of specific jewelry pieces, the palace press office went silent for days before issuing vague statements about routine inventory procedures. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A baggage handler at the private aviation terminal, who had been asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement 3 weeks earlier, decided the public had a right to know. He provided Walsh with details about an unusual security incident involving high-level royal protection officers and delayed flights. He couldn't provide specifics about what was found, but he described the atmosphere of crisis, the arrival of senior police officials, and the hours-long lockdown of the terminal. Walsh connected the dots. She approached Scotland Yard for comment, framing her questions carefully. The official response was a textbook non-answer, but she noticed something crucial. They didn't deny an investigation was occurring. For a journalist, that silence spoke volumes. She began writing a preliminary story, knowing that once published it would trigger a media frenzy that would force official responses. The Guardian published Walsh's article on Thursday morning. The headline was restrained compared to what it could have been. Questions raised about royal jewelry collection amid security incident. The article was careful, based entirely on verifiable facts and official non-denials. It didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but laid out a timeline of suspicious events and unexplained absences. Within hours, every major news outlet in Britain was pursuing the story. The palace's initial response was a disaster of miscommunication and conflicting statements. A morning press release insisted there was no investigation and everything was routine. By afternoon, forced to address specific questions about the airport incident, a second statement acknowledged a minor security matter that has been resolved. Evening brought a third attempt, this one mentioning ongoing inquiries but refusing to provide details. The contradictions and obvious attempts at concealment only intensified media scrutiny. Social media erupted with speculation. Royal watchers, conspiracy theorists, and ordinary citizens shared theories ranging from plausible to absurd. Some suggested Camilla was being framed by family members who never accepted her. Others proposed she was smuggling items out of legitimate concern about the royal family's finances. A few, remarkably close to the truth, suggested systematic theft had been uncovered. The hashtag Royal Jewels mystery trended globally within 24 hours. King Charles faced an impossible situation. His wife stood accused, even if not yet formally, of crimes against the crown itself. The king had been briefed on the investigation's findings days earlier, a conversation that staff described as devastating. Charles had demanded to see all evidence personally, spent hours reviewing documents and recordings from Camilla's interrogation. The man who had waited decades to become king now faced a crisis that threatened the monarchy's very foundation. Behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace, frantic meetings took place involving the king's senior advisors, constitutional lawyers, government officials, and public relations experts. The consensus was grim. If the full extent of Camilla's actions became public, the damage would be catastrophic. Public opinion, already divided about Camilla's role as queen consort, would turn decisively against her. The monarchy's carefully maintained image of duty and service would be shattered by revelations of greed and betrayal. Prince William and Catherine were brought into discussions, their opinions sought on how to manage the crisis. William, who had never fully reconciled with his stepmother, was reportedly blunt in his assessment. The evidence was overwhelming, and protecting Camilla would only make the eventual scandal worse. Catherine, always conscious of public perception, worried about the impact on their children and the monarchy's future. The younger generation of royals found themselves in the uncomfortable position of potentially choosing between family loyalty and institutional preservation. The Prime Minister was kept constantly updated. This wasn't just a family matter, but a national crisis with constitutional implications. If criminal charges were filed against a queen consort, what precedents applied? Could she be tried in regular courts? Would she retain her title during prosecution? What were the international ramifications? Legal scholars dug through centuries of precedent, finding little guidance for such an extraordinary situation. Public opinion polls showed fascinating divisions. Older citizens, particularly those who remembered Queen Elizabeth with reverence, expressed outrage at the alleged desecration of her legacy. Younger Britons were more cynical, seeing it as confirmation that the royal family were ordinary people with ordinary flaws, not the elevated figures of myth. Support for the monarchy itself began to dip, particularly among those who had been ambivalent about its continued relevance. International reaction was swift and varied. American media covered it as sensational entertainment, comparing it to the best British dramas. European royal houses maintained diplomatic silence, but privately expressed concern about the precedent this set for all constitutional monarchies. Commonwealth nations watched carefully, some using the scandal to reinforce arguments for becoming republics, others defending the institution while condemning the individual. The drip of revelations continued as more details leaked to the press. A tabloid published photos of some of the jewelry pieces found at the airport. Images that experts confirmed matched items from the royal collection. Another outlet reported on offshore accounts and shell companies, connecting financial dots that painted a picture of systematic fraud. Each new revelation brought fresh waves of public shock and anger. Camilla remained largely out of sight, confined to a private residence on the Windsor estate. The few photographs that emerged showed a woman visibly strained, aging rapidly under the stress. Her few public statements, issued through lawyers, maintained her innocence, and claimed misunderstandings would be clarified. These statements convinced few and often made situations worse, coming across as tone-deaf denials in the face of mounting evidence. Her friends and defenders grew fewer by the day. Those who had supported her during the difficult years when she was blamed for Charles and Diana's divorce now found themselves in uncomfortable positions. Some remained loyal, arguing that the evidence must be incomplete or misconstrued. Others quietly distanced themselves, removing social media posts that had praised her and declining to comment when journalists called. The Church of England, with the king as its titular head, faced its own uncomfortable questions. Could a queen consort facing credible accusations of theft still participate in religious ceremonies? What did this say about the moral authority of the royal family in matters of faith? Church leaders issued carefully worded statements about the presumption of innocence, while privately expressing deep concern about the spiritual implications. Economic impacts began appearing. Companies that held royal warrants using their association with the monarchy as premium branding reported customer backlash. Some explicitly distanced themselves from Camilla while maintaining ties to other royals. Tourism to royal sites initially spiked as people flocked to see the locations involved in the scandal. But analysts worried about long-term damage to Britain's valuable royal tourism industry. Parliament debated the matter, with Republicans seizing the opportunity to call for abolishing the monarchy entirely. Monarchists defended the institution while condemning individual actions, arguing that one person's crimes shouldn't destroy centuries of tradition. The debates were heated, revealing deep divisions in British society about the role and relevance of royalty in modern times. Charles struggled visibly with the dual role of being both a husband and a king. Those close to him described a man torn between personal loyalty and constitutional duty. He had spent his entire life preparing to be monarch, guided by his mother's example of putting duty above all else. Now following that example might require sacrificing his wife to preserve the institution. Friends reported he barely slept, spending nights reviewing documents, consulting advisors, and wrestling with decisions no king should have to make. The palace eventually appointed a special advisor to manage the crisis, a former government minister known for handling sensitive situations. Her first action was to establish clearer communication protocols, ending the chaotic mix of contradictory statements that had worsened the initial response. She insisted on complete transparency, though. The decision came on a Monday morning that would be remembered as one of the most significant in British legal history. The Director of Public Prosecutions, standing before a packed press conference, announced that formal charges would be filed against Her Majesty Queen Camilla. The charges were extensive: theft, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, money laundering, and abuse of public position. Each charge carried substantial prison time. The room erupted with questions, flashbulbs, and the clicking of keyboards as journalists raced to file their reports. The legal framework had been carefully constructed over weeks of intensive consultation. Constitutional experts had determined that while a reigning monarch held certain immunities, a consort did not enjoy the same protections. Camilla could be prosecuted in criminal court like any other citizen. However, the proceedings would need to account for security concerns, dignity considerations, and the unprecedented nature of trying someone of her status. A special judicial panel was assembled to oversee the case. The trial was scheduled for the Royal Courts of Justice, an appropriate venue given the symbolic weight of the proceedings. Security preparations were massive. The building's perimeter was secured, counter-terrorism units were deployed, and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios, from assassination attempts to mass protests. The trial itself would be partially closed to the public during testimony involving national security matters, but transcripts would be released with appropriate redactions. The prosecution team was led by Sir Malcolm Harrison, a Queen's Counsel known for his methodical approach and unshakable courtroom demeanor. He had prosecuted corrupt politicians, fraudulent businessmen, and organized crime figures. This case, however, dwarfed anything in his considerable experience. He assembled a team of specialists in art fraud, financial crimes, and royal protocol, knowing he needed expertise across multiple domains. Camilla's defense team was equally formidable. Lord Edward Pemberton, one of Britain's most expensive and successful defense barristers, took the lead. His strategy became apparent in preliminary motions. acknowledge that items were found but argue they were legitimately gifted, with the late Queen's verbal authorization being sufficient under royal family customs. He would paint Camilla as a victim of institutional dysfunction and overzealous prosecution. The preliminary hearings attracted global attention. Journalists from every major international outlet secured credentials. The courtroom sketches, necessary because photography wasn't permitted inside, became instant historical artifacts. The sight of the Queen consort sitting in a defendant's box flanked by security was surreal even for those who had followed every development of the scandal. The prosecution's opening statement laid out their case with devastating clarity. Sir Malcolm methodically presented the evidence of systematic theft over 2 years, the network of international dealers, the offshore accounts, and the sophisticated methods used to bypass security. He introduced authenticated palace records showing which items were crown property versus personal possessions, demolishing the defense's central claim before it could be fully articulated. His presentation took 3 full days, each revelation more damaging than the last. The first key witness was Dr. Helena Price, the Royal Collection curator. Her testimony established the provenance and ownership status of each stolen item. She brought centuries of documentation, photographs from official events, and detailed catalog records. Under Sir Malcolm's questioning, she explained how the Royal Collection worked, how items were tracked, and what protocols governed their use. Most damaging, she produced records showing that none of the items in question had been authorized for gifting through proper channels. Cross-examination by Lord Pemberton attempted to establish that verbal gifts were common in royal practice. That documentation wasn't always maintained for informal transfers. Dr. Price held firm. For items of this significance and value, she testified, documentation was mandatory. The late Queen Elizabeth, she explained, was meticulous about such matters and would never have verbally promised items worth millions without proper paperwork. The defense's strategy stumbled against the weight of institutional procedure and historical practice. The former lady-in-waiting, Susan Palmer, provided emotionally charged testimony. She described observing Camilla's suspicious behavior, the secret photography sessions, the unexplained absences during foreign trips. Under oath, she revealed conversations where Camilla had expressed resentment toward the late Queen, feeling undervalued and underpaid despite her position. These statements, Palmer testified, were sometimes accompanied by comments about jewelry being wasted in vaults when it could be put to better use. Marcus Webb, the security officer who had deleted footage, was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. He described in detail how Camilla had manipulated him, appealing to his sympathy during the mourning period, convincing him that deleting footage was protecting the royal family's privacy. He explained the technical aspects of what the footage had shown before deletion: Camilla removing items from the vault, concealing them in her personal belongings, violating multiple security protocols. His obvious remorse and detailed technical knowledge made him a compelling witness. The international dealers testified via video link, having negotiated their own immunity deals with various jurisdictions. André Beaumont from Geneva provided meticulous records of his transactions. He identified Camilla in courtroom photos, confirming their meetings and business dealings. He brought receipts, transfer documents, and communications that showed a professional smuggling operation, not simple misunderstandings about gifts. His testimony demolished any remaining notion that this was innocent confusion. Financial analysts walked the court through the money trail. They showed how millions of pounds from jewelry sales had been laundered through shell companies, eventually reaching accounts Camilla controlled. They presented evidence of her mounting personal debts, her expensive lifestyle exceeding her income, and how the timing of jewelry sales corresponded with major payments she needed to make. The financial motive was established beyond doubt. The defense called its own witnesses, attempting to establish Camilla's good character and challenge the prosecution's narrative. Several friends testified about her charitable work, her dedication to royal duties, and her personal kindness. However, under cross-examination, none could provide evidence supporting the claim that the late Queen had verbally gifted these specific items. Their testimony, while humanizing Camilla, didn't address the central charges. Lord Pemberton attempted to introduce testimony about the stress and pressure of royal life, suggesting Camilla had suffered from mental health issues that affected her judgment. Psychiatric experts testified about how the constant public scrutiny, the comparison to Diana, and the weight of expectations could create psychological distress. The prosecution countered with their own experts, who testified that while stress might be a mitigating factor, the sophisticated long-term nature of the scheme indicated clear, calculated planning incompatible with diminished capacity. The most anticipated testimony was Camilla's own. After days of deliberation with her legal team, she took the stand. Dressed conservatively, showing none of her usual regal bearing, she presented as a woman broken by circumstances. Her testimony followed the defense strategy closely. She maintained the items were gifts, promised verbally by the late queen during private moments. She expressed confusion about protocols, claiming she thought verbal promises from the monarch were binding. She denied knowledge of the financial transactions, suggesting her advisors had handled such matters without her full understanding. Sir Malcolm's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. He presented her with specific dates and locations, asking for details about the alleged verbal gifts. Her answers were vague, inconsistent with known facts about where the late queen was on certain dates or who else was present. He showed her records of her communications with dealers, her personal oversight of financial transactions. He asked about specific security violations, the deleted footage, the replica jewelry. Each answer seemed to contradict previous testimony or documentary evidence. The prosecution introduced recorded phone calls obtained through legal wiretaps during the investigation. In these conversations, Camilla discussed merchandise and clients with intermediaries, using language that clearly indicated awareness of illegal activity. Most damning was a conversation recorded 2 weeks before the airport incident, where she expressed concern about moving the most valuable pieces before the full inventory, and mentioned needing to complete sales in France. The recording, played in open court, devastated the defense's position. Character witnesses for the prosecution included former palace staff who testified about Camilla's sense of entitlement, her resentment toward restrictions on her spending, and her comments about deserving more compensation for her role. They described observing her taking items without proper documentation, seeing her meet with unknown individuals during official functions, and noticing her paranoia increasing as the investigation began to close in. Expert testimony about the replicas revealed sophisticated forgery operations. The fake pieces that had replaced stolen originals were. The jury deliberated for 4 days, a period during which Britain seemed to hold its collective breath. News channels ran continuous coverage, analyzing every aspect of the trial, interviewing legal experts and speculating about possible outcomes. Betting shops took wagers on the verdict, though many found the practice distasteful given the gravity of the situation. Social media was consumed with debate, families divided over dinner tables, and pubs filled with arguments about justice, monarchy, and privilege. On Friday afternoon, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled rapidly with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had won the lottery for gallery seats. King Charles was not present, following legal advice that his appearance might be seen as attempting to influence proceedings or demonstrate lack of confidence in the judicial system. However, senior palace officials sat in designated areas, their expressions carefully neutral. Camilla entered the courtroom looking diminished, dressed simply in dark colors, her face pale and showing the strain of weeks under scrutiny. She stood as protocol demanded when the judge entered, a woman who had once commanded rooms through royal status now subject to the same judicial authority as any citizen. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged schoolteacher from Manchester whose name would be etched in history books. The judge asked if they had reached verdicts on all counts. The foreman confirmed they had. The court clerk read each charge, and after each the foreman delivered the jury's decision. Guilty. 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 The pattern continued through all charges. The theft of royal heirlooms, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and abuse of public position. On every count, the jury had found the evidence sufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The courtroom reaction was immediate, but controlled. Gasps, whispered exclamations, the furious scribbling of notes. Camilla swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the defendant's box for support. Her legal team sat in stunned silence despite having prepared for this possibility. Outside, news of the verdict spread instantly. triggering celebrations among those who saw it as validation that no one was above the law, and somber reflection among those who mourned what it meant for the monarchy. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, allowing time for pre-sentencing reports and victim impact statements. The stolen items themselves were considered victims in legal terms, cultural property belonging to the nation. Museum curators, historians, and cultural heritage experts provided statements about the significance of what had been taken and the damage done to public trust and royal stewardship of national treasures. The sentencing hearing brought new revelations. The prosecution introduced evidence that had been held back during the trial, additional thefts not included in the original charges. Investigators had continued working, uncovering more missing pieces, more offshore transactions, more evidence of systematic looting extending back at least 5 years. While these couldn't affect the current verdict, they influenced sentencing considerations and painted an even darker picture of the scope of criminality. Sir Malcolm argued for substantial prison time. This wasn't minor theft, but betrayal of public trust on a massive scale, crimes that had enriched the defendant by millions while depriving the nation of its heritage. He emphasized premeditation, sophistication, and lack of remorse. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing Camilla's age, health concerns, and arguing that prison would serve no rehabilitative purpose for someone in her position. The judge, Lady Justice Morrison, delivered her sentencing remarks with careful precision. She acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the case, the defendant's position, and the public interest in the outcome. However, she emphasized that the law applied equally to all citizens, that royal status neither aggravated nor mitigated the seriousness of the offenses. She detailed the systematic nature of the crimes, the betrayal of trust, and the sophisticated methods employed. The sentence was 8 years' imprisonment, a substantial term reflecting the severity and duration of the criminal enterprise. Additionally, all assets connected to the crimes were to be seized, proceeds from jewelry sales recovered where possible, and full restitution made to the royal collection. Camilla would serve her sentence in a medium security facility, with appropriate provisions for her security and health needs, but without special privileges beyond those available to any elderly prisoner with medical conditions. The aftermath was seismic. King Charles issued a brief statement expressing profound disappointment and sadness, but supporting the judicial process and accepting its verdict. His private grief was reportedly immense. Friends described a man devastated not just by his wife's conviction, but by the betrayal itself. The realization that throughout their years together, she had been systematically stealing from his family's legacy. The immediate question became Camilla's titles and position. Constitutional experts debated whether a convicted felon could retain the title of Queen Consort. Within days, palace officials announced that Camilla would be stripped of all royal titles, patronages, and honors. She was no longer Queen Consort, no longer Her Majesty, no longer part of the official royal family. The titles could not erase the marriage itself, but they removed all trappings of royal status. She would serve her sentence as Camilla Parker Bowles, private citizen and convicted criminal. The impact on the monarchy was profound. Public opinion polls showed complex reactions. Some praised the institution for not interfering with justice, seeing it as evidence that modern monarchy could coexist with democratic principles. Others saw the entire affair as confirmation that royalty was obsolete, that hereditary privilege inevitably bred corruption and entitlement. Republican movements gained momentum, particularly among younger citizens who had grown up questioning the relevance of monarchy. King Charles undertook a comprehensive review of palace security, inventory procedures, and financial oversight. External auditors were brought in to examine all royal collections, ensuring nothing else was missing. New protocols were established for tracking valuable items, with digital systems replacing trust-based procedures. The jewelry vault saw upgraded security with multiple authentication requirements and continuous monitoring. The recovered items were returned to the royal collection, though their history was forever altered. Each piece now carried the story of its theft and recovery, a permanent reminder of betrayal from within. Some suggested they should be displayed with information about the scandal, turning a criminal episode into a teaching moment about integrity and justice. Others argued for discretion, maintaining the dignity of items that had served monarchs for centuries. The international dealers and accomplices faced their own legal consequences. André Beaumont received a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation, though his reputation was destroyed. The shell companies were dismantled, their assets seized. Charlotte Dubois in France faced charges related to receiving stolen goods, her aristocratic status offering no protection from prosecution. The network that had facilitated the crimes was systematically dismantled by cooperating law enforcement agencies. Marcus Webb, the security officer who had deleted footage, faced professional ruin despite his immunity from criminal prosecution. He lost his position and found himself unemployable in security roles. His testimony had been crucial for the prosecution, but his initial complicity in the cover-up meant he could never be trusted in positions of responsibility again. He became a cautionary tale about the costs of misplaced loyalty. Camilla adjusted to prison life under extraordinary circumstances. She was kept separate from the general population for security reasons but was not given luxurious accommodations. The facility was clean and secure but institutional, a stark contrast to palace life. Reports from prison staff described her as withdrawn, spending time reading and avoiding other inmates when possible. She reportedly refused most visitors, including family members trying to maintain contact. The trial and conviction generated extensive academic analysis. Legal scholars wrote papers about the constitutional implications, examining how the case had navigated uncharted waters in British law. Sociologists studied public reactions, finding fascinating patterns in how different demographic groups interpreted the scandal. Historians placed it in context with other royal crises, debating whether this represented monarchy's resilience or its death rattle. The tourism industry experienced unexpected effects. Windsor Castle and other royal sites saw increased visitors, many wanting to see where the crimes had occurred. Specialized tours emerged, offering scandal tourism experiences that palace officials found distasteful but couldn't prevent. The jewelry collection itself became a major attraction, with people queuing for hours to see the recovered pieces and learn their stories. King Charles's reign continued under the shadow of the scandal. His public appearances showed a man aged by experience, carrying the weight of personal betrayal and institutional crisis. He threw himself into royal duties with renewed dedication, perhaps attempting to restore dignity through service. His relationship with his sons strengthened, the shared experience of navigating the crisis creating unexpected bonds. Prince William emerged as a key figure in the monarchy's future.